Hello, all, and welcome to the July edition of our IT Management Modernization Community of Interest meeting. My name is Daniel York, and on my real-life job, I work here within GSA's Office of Government-Wide Policy, but I also serve as the government chair of the ACT-IAC ITMM COI. On the next page here, you'll see myself, as well as our vice chair, Rob, and all of our industry partners, Varsha, and actually, I think Shaq might be a misprint at this point. I think that may have changed since the last deck, because I think Shaq is just transferring out. Anywho, you can see us all there on the screen. But what you're really here for today is not to hear me talk about our leadership. What you're really here today is to hear from our guest speakers on the next slide. Boom, look at that. It's like magic. So I'm going to kick it off to Beth, my actually former deputy principal. You had a very long title, Beth. Deputy principal something or other at GSA, Office of Government Policy, but currently in your current phase in MetaPhase. So I'll kick it off to you to introduce our speakers and yourself.
Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you, ACT-IAC. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. It's certainly nice to see everyone. Yeah, so I'm very excited to be talking about shared services again, and I'm even more excited to be able to do that with Brenna Isman, who is the Senior Director for Research and Government Solutions at NAPA. Welcome, Brenna, and thanks for sitting down with us for a little while today to talk shared services.
Thank you, Beth. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Did you want to give everybody a little background about you and your role at NAPA?
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, I'm Brenna Isman. I'm the Senior Director of Research and Government Solutions. I've been at the Academy for almost 18 years. I've been doing this a little while. I like to say that I started in a middle school internship. But really, I think just a few quick minutes for anyone who might not be familiar with the National Academy of Public Administration, or NAPA as we're known, not the spark plugs, and unfortunately not the wine either. But we are a congressionally chartered, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, similar to National Academies of Science, but on a much smaller scale. The mission for us is to improve efficiency, effectiveness, transparency, and accountability at all levels of government. We do work with all branches and levels of government, often through congressionally directed or agency-initiated studies. And one of the most unique features that we have is our network of over 1,000 fellows. These are folks who are elected by their peers and represent thought leadership in the public sector as practitioners, academics, and association and private sector leaders. I've had the good fortune to work with Beth as her role as a NAPA fellow, as well as some of the most important folks at ACT-IAC, Dave Wintergren and Margie Graves. And these fellows oversee all of our research conducted by a professional study staff, and they're actively engaged in our thought leadership and our convenings. Many of these fellows have had deep expertise in leadership roles, building and growing shared services, engaging with the Shared Services Leadership Coalition events that NAPA and SEA co-sponsor, holding monthly events to advance shared services in the federal government. And then where I play a more prominent role is in a number of assessments and implementation guidance initiatives that we've had over the last few years to address challenges and opportunities within shared service organizations. And those included USDA's National Finance Center and looking at a modernization study, USDA's Farm Production and Conservation Business Center, FPAC-PC, much easier title, and the National Institutes of Health Central Services. This shared service portfolio really represents a perfect example of agency referrals that really drove our expanded expertise in this area for NAPA and what we commonly call that focus area of supporting the mission and serving the internal customer. Just a few minutes just about the work that we did, because I think it informs informs a lot of my thinking and a lot of the analysis that we've done on thinking through what's worked, what could be better, and where we might go. Back in 2024, NIH engaged NAPA to perform its first independent external review of their central services enterprise in about 20 years. And that, the NIH's central services really provide support across all of the then 27 institutes and centers. And as I think we all know, NIH has a pretty broad array of different centers and institutions So this study really looked at the assessment of like some critical topics of governance, budgeting and financial management, information technology, customer experience. And at the tail end of that engagement, we also delivered a comprehensive service catalog, which included a pretty, again, wide variety of services that NIH offers to its customers. We also worked with NFC, as I mentioned, in 2023. They reached out to us to conduct an analysis of their mission and an assessment of its organizational capacity to meet its mission requirements. But again, the tasks here were around governance and finance structures, looking at supporting technology systems, internal organization and infrastructure, and stakeholder engagement. And I really want to stress here that, NFC is providing human resource management services across, I think it's like 170 different customer agencies. And they've been around for about 50 years, and that has included a period of time where, located down in New Orleans, they felt the impact of Katrina very, very deeply, and still to this day have some of those challenges that have lingered. But one of the things that they are so proud of, and I think is enormously impressive, is that they've never missed a payment. Folks have always gotten their paychecks and their retirement retirement benefits on time, which is an amazing thing. And then lastly, again, working with the USDA, not looking directly at some of their mission focused work, but their FPAC business center, as I mentioned, again, looking at where they could be, I think, more successful after several attempts at realignment from their 2018 consolidation of business services to a couple of different functions within USDA. Again, looking a little bit more and identifying ways to strengthen their service level agreements, their catalog, and then a change management playbook, which I suspect, Beth, as we talk, we're going to be talking about the importance of those factors in addition to what technology can do to enable. So that was a pretty big mouthful, but that kind of gives a little bit of sense of how we've learned and how we've really developed our thinking around shared services.
Yeah, that's terrific. And I think that we as a government are really fortunate to be able to have extensions of government like NAPA that can come in and really help us better understand our challenges, to be able to look at it across government, like you've been able to do with looking at different agencies, and really to help recommend pathways forward. I think that this is not the first time that anybody on this call probably has heard about shared services. It has been a thing we've been talking about for decades, that we've experienced, to your point, so much success in so far. And as the world continues to change, how do we continue to adapt our entire strategy around shared services to the changes that are happening, both in technology, but also in government at large? So I think that that is the credibility you bring to this conversation, Brenna, and I think we're all excited to hear from you today about, and I'd really love for you to share, like, in all of this research that you've been doing and these studies that you guys have led and the engagement that you've had with all these different organizations today in 2026, what are you hearing are the recent big themes about shared services at large, especially with the push this administration has had for more efficiency and better technologies?
Yeah, thanks. And we've been fortunate to working with so many different agencies to really build on the benchmarking and our capacity to reach across a number of different agencies, and with our fellows and other network partners to really focus on how do we do this better? What's the promising steps moving forward? And I think we're in a really interesting time right now. When we think about what's happening in the federal space, it certainly signals a renewed focus and elevation of some of the concepts. I think a great example is the Shared Services Governance Board. This is not something that's brand new, but thinking about its current construction of a cross-council board of agency executives that's really representing the federal executive councils. Thinking about it in the past, this function was organized a little bit more around, various mission support lines of business, and around functional communities the CFO, CHICOs, CIOs, and all important, but the board now presents in kind of a slightly new way to think about how it can serve as an agency voice to work with OMB and on shared agency needs for technology and services that really advance the management priorities and set direction on the implementation. I think it can really play a pivotal role in resolving cross-functional inconsistencies that, related to things like data agreement and business standards, and help to support OMB policy officials who have certainly signaled that this is an important set of initiatives. And again, going to your point about the importance of efficiency. I think, the executives from across the federal enterprise can really surface opportunities and concerns and policies affecting better agency adoption and optimal use. It really just makes me think that this is kind of obvious, but sometimes it's a good thing to be restating that government really gets the greatest return when it standardizes common business processes and data and infrastructure, and then looks to really preserve the flexibility where mission execution really truly differs. And I think that's been a theme of what we've seen, and it kind of weaves through a lot of the conversations we've been having, figuring out where that flexibility is most needed and where the standardization can make the case. But I think there are a number of promising signs as we think about what comes next and how this continues to evolve. Sometimes it's some incremental shifts and something that I know you know much better than I do, Beth, how sometimes it takes a while to make some of that progress.
It does. It does. Like I said, we've been talking about this a long time. My time in government was really, especially in the last few years, was really dedicated to moving it forward, right? Setting up the right governance so the decisions could be made. And really, I think the truth is that like the shared service conversation has outlasted multiple administrations, regardless of party. It continues to move forward, which I think is a strong sign that although we might not have all of the details worked out, which I would probably say everybody on this call would have some flag to raise about what's working or what's not working.
Yeah.
It can't really be argued that it is a good management initiative because it continues to be a priority, whether it's in the PMA, whether it's a priority within agencies, right? Just it depends on the level, but it is still the idea that we don't need as many systems as that we have, that we can actually, to your point, standardize some processes, and that we can really reap the benefit of that on a larger scale. So when I left government, we were actually excited to have instituted that shared service governance board. And I'm super proud of the fact that it's still there, but evolved into what I guess this current group of leaders finds to be, to your point, the most efficient way to work across different lines of business. So, having the CX, the representatives from the councils there, I think is a great pivot. We also, when I left, it designated 4 QSMO offices, the Quality Service Management offices. And as those functions continue to expand and evolve, Brenna, like what exposure have you had to QSMOs, and what role do you think they should play over the next few years as we continue to talk about shared services?
What's interesting is we've done our data collection, done interviews, done some benchmarking, and looked at a number of different ways to assist these agencies as they're thinking through their challenges and opportunities. We've been pleasantly surprised along the way that as we come up with our findings, with our suggestions for guidance and governance, that without referencing the QSMOs, we've come to a very similar place, which suggests that either we're both right or we're both wrong. And I'm going to go with we're both right. And as I think about what comes next, it does seem to me that QSMOs should increasingly act like those market shapers, those that are standard setters, and those capability integrators as we look at what what comes in the future. But I have to be honest, Beth, as someone who I know has been referred to as the QSMO godmother, I really think that I would like to hear more of your perspective on this as someone who has had such a deep and lasting role in establishing the QSMO. So I'm throwing it back to you as the expert.
The QSMO godmother, Brenna. It's like a title out of Game of Thrones. Yeah. I have to say, like, sometimes you leave government and you like hope that the thing that you did, your legacy really sticks. And I'm super excited that the QSMOs have taken kind of that vision that we had for them and truly moved it forward in a way that really does seem to make sense for each of them. I think it acknowledges a lot of the fact that we've heard so much feedback over the years that not all lines of business can be treated the same way. That the approach can't be the same for all of them. And I think they've each really made significant progress since they were created. I also think they've established and enforced the standards that we've talked about, right? The kind of common outcomes that agencies would be looking for, both in the technology, but also in the services that they're looking to acquire. They've built marketplaces and they've vetted commercial solutions of federal providers to make sure that they are compliant with those standards. But most importantly, I think they're shifting the conversation from agency-specific solutions to what we think we actually can share across government in terms of capabilities and outcomes. And the expansion of the marketplaces, the options. Everybody always said we need options, right? We want options because my mission is different than your mission, and so we need options because one option might be better for me than another. They're making it easier for agencies to adopt options that we know are proven to meet the standards instead of starting from scratch, which all of those things were exactly what we had envisioned the QSMOs to do. And that said, I would say that like this is just the first step. To your point, there's so much more they can do as like the gatekeepers or the managers of these marketplaces, including working together, because as we all know, these processes and systems all have to connect and be integrated. And so helping to move agencies off of these legacy intertwined deep webs of no one knows into a new environment that all works seamlessly together and retiring some of the duplication. There is a lot to be done still and realizing the benefits of that. There is a cost to moving and it will take a while before we actually realize the benefits, and we need to have the patience to do that. And I think with their leadership and what they've done, the momentum is there to keep going. And I think that we're going to be soon entering the phase we'll be able to see those benefits at scale.
I would agree. Yeah.
And so like on that note, I think a lot about technology, you know, and you have to talk about technology as part of shared services, but I do think that like as technology becomes more commoditized, what we will talk more about is standards and business process and how we've made those things more efficient as a result of technology. And that moving to shared services is not just about the technology, but it is a paramount to the shared service strategy because you're not going to get a lot of those efficiencies without it. But what, in your take, what do you think the role is of technology in getting agencies to actually adopt shared services?
Well, it's interesting because so much of the work we do, you know, another area of focus that we've identified is what I call the intersection of governance and technology, governance and science. You know, working with agencies that are using technology in innovative ways. We're not going to be the one to set up the systems or write the software. But what else has to come into that? And we already kind of alluded to it a little bit, that so much of the progress that's been made has been the result of the governance, correct? You know, appropriate governance, appropriate measurement, appropriate and effective ways to meet the mission. So all of our engagements have been focused on more on what technology enables. And where the agencies are able to kind of measure those improvements. So one of the through lines of the work we've done is about really identifying those metrics and pushing the agencies to really look at measuring in a way that tells them, yes, the technology is working. It's doing what it's supposed to in terms of integrating about and improving the ability to meet the mission of the agencies. And some of the ones, again, it's always very comforting and rewarding to see those certain themes that emerge, despite whether it's working with FPAC or NIH. And again, there's areas that need to be customized, but some of the metrics that have been most successful and have been able to allow the agencies to say, yes, this technology has empowered this capacity, or things like user satisfaction, service availability and reliability, things like time to onboard customers, reduction in administrative burden, workforce productivity, all those things that we talk about, but then pushing them a little bit out of their comfort zone. We hear frequently like, well, that's tough to measure. So it is hard to capture in meaningful ways, but it means getting away from things like the number of financial transactions processed. Okay, really, what does that tell you? Or IT services delivered, but digging down and really doing the so what, okay, take this the next stop to this next step to say, you know, shifting to more refined sets of discussions, like something like the time researchers wait for computing services. That's a little bit more specific and really tells you whether things are changing and working. Hiring specialist support, twice as many hiring actions get done due to workflow automation. So that's kind of where, you know, I'm no expert and don't have a lot to contribute on AI, but knowing where things like that can help so that the agencies can then say, okay, because of this technology, I am delivering services better. More folks are being placed in those critical roles. Researchers that desperately need, you know, IT support are getting it more quickly and moving the conversation there. So that's really more of from where I sit and where NAPA's lens is focused, and allowing others to do the highly technical technology IT piece of it.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because I sit in a different role now, right? In government for a long time, and then outside of government now at a tech company that is, yeah, it's interesting because technology is just evolving so much faster than the traditional government acquisition cycle. And so I believe that private sector has a growing and great responsibility to continuously innovate, even more so today than before. And I would say this, like, not just every few years should you be getting a new version, right? Like everybody gets all stressed about the fact that like, oh, so somebody's going to upgrade to a new version and I need millions of dollars to be able to support that. Like that's the old way of doing things. Like every few days and weeks is how fast you should be getting new functionality. And I will say, I'm gonna tell you guys a little fun story, a little personal story. My 11-year-old son this week is hanging out with a teenager friend, kind of keep an eye on him. And yesterday, this teenager friend introduced my son to a couple of cool technologies. And in an afternoon, they built a website. And they sent me the website last night. They were like, what do you think about this? And it was really cool. It was like a gaming website, like you could sign up for games and had all sorts of cool things in it. And I was like, wait, you did this in an afternoon? And I knew that they could. And I said, I was like, I'm going to give you some feedback. And then by 11 a.m. today, they sent me a new version with all of my feedback already done. That's how fast that these development tools that have all of this innovation and AI kind of baked in, and I'll be honest, you really can't find development tools anymore that don't. That's how fast that if you're using these tools right, and if you've brought these tools into your development space, that's how fast the government should be getting software and changes. You don't have to wait anymore. It should be the next day. And if your current vendors aren't already doing that, whether it's shared service space or not, maybe I'll say this, and I know AI is a divisive topic, but I don't think they should retain their place in our marketplaces because it's a new world. And if you didn't already know that development can be done in hours and not months, then the current vendors you have already aren't doing you any favors.
Right.
And I really do believe that government focusing on mission and standards and security and letting vendors ship software repeatedly and often and getting it right the first time because there are now tools that also allow them to make sure they're getting it right. Like you guys, like we can move so much faster and you can get what you need so much faster. And that means you're delivering your mission so much better. And I think that at the end of the day is what we're all here for.
So do you think that, You know, I was thinking, I was jotting down as you were talking, like that tension between pacing, right? The private sector often, at least stereotypically, works at a different pace, right? And federal government can be described as slower and less less adept at moving at a quicker pace. Do you think some of that will be somewhat resolved now? I don't believe that your 11-year-old is going to go into government in the next few days or weeks or years. But will some of that pacing issue be somewhat resolved by a new set of government employees that are just used to things moving more quickly?
I mean, maybe like good things can come from change, right? And I think that that's part of it. I think a little bit of it for me anyway, a solid Gen Xer is I needed to see it to believe it, right? Like I heard all of it and it was like, yeah. I mean, I know y'all say it's AI magic. That's how I felt about it. It was like AI magic, but like to actually see it happen for us. And we have clients now in government who are very open to like, just show it, just prove it. Like, show me that you can actually do it. Show me that it works. Show me it's not vaporware. Everybody always thinks it's vaporware. Like, and once you see it and you believe it, like you almost, if you don't adopt it and you don't support the idea that it can go faster, then are you supporting the idea that you want to stay slow? Right. And so but there is a responsibility of your private sector partners, or even like your own OCIO organizations that are really leaning into this, to show you and to explain how it works, and to help you accept whatever the risks are, right? And I think that part of the process, that is where we are right now, in terms of AI governance and adoption, all of that. Like, it's not AI, these are just tools that everybody is using. It doesn't matter if you're using ServiceNow or using Salesforce. Anyone who develops anything is using these tools to do it faster. And I do think it's the responsibility of private sector to also then look at how much faster that these things can be done. And then there's a responsibility to transfer those savings to government as well.
Okay, I'm cautiously optimistic.
I mean, I'll send my 11-year-old over, Brenna. He'll convince you.
I'm sure he will run circles around all that
remarkable.
I'm trying to do in technology.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the other things that we had talked about in this conversation is some of what you've seen in some of the various strategies, like thinking about some of the $1 billion consolidated spend in financial management, SIN, and the new grants. And I wonder if there is some topics there that kind of the lead into doing things faster, and what new innovations are there that might be able to that you might be able to share a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I think so. Specifically, when I know, and I will not be able to do to give credit where credit is due on some of the progress that the QSMOs have made. But one of the, I've been following the headlines, and I still talk to a lot of folks in government, and I think the way that they're moving the needle forward is, as I mentioned before, exactly what we had envisioned for the role of the QSMOs. But I think the fact that they're all doing it just slightly differently, that's the part that impresses me the most, because it was, again, like I said before, everyone always said, like, one size does not fit all. And I think it's important to realize, like, there are people listening, right? And I think it's important to realize that people are hearing that, and like what works for financial management might not work the same way for HR, might not work the same way for grants, and that's okay. And they're working together to make sure that they're learning lessons from each other. And so, like, financial management has leveraged like the cross-agency relationship, and they led the way on this, right, with GSA, to create the SIN on GSA Mass with approved financial management solutions. They have like over 120 commercial systems and services that are options for agency in that marketplace right now. And rumor has it, this is just rumor, that it's they've consolidated like $1 billion in spend on that SIN, which, like, even if government was going to spend that money anyway, the idea that that's now consolidated in one place means that we're holding vendors to the same standards, we're holding them to terms and conditions that are consistent, and it's scalable. So I think that's huge, right? That was the whole idea. And I think what's also impressive to me is that the Protecting America's Bank Account EO made it mandatory to use that marketplace. The other thing that we always debated for years was, should shared services be mandatory or not? And the reason nobody wanted to make it mandatory was because everybody was like, well, I don't want to just move to that one solution. What if it doesn't work for me? But the combination of we've made it mandatory and now you have this marketplace of solutions to choose from is like, that's like a, I don't know, that's like the perfect combination, I think. So kudos to the financial management QSMO and the work that Treasury's done. And then in a different angle, right? Different approach strategy, OPM and the HR QSMO selected the single vendor to do HR solutions. Arguing that will be extremely cost effective over time for the federal government. My feelings on this one, just Beth speaking, is that I hope that they have also allocated the right budget for change management on that, because that will be a significant lift. And making sure that they have a reasonable expectation for time frame on moving to that. The cost to moving to that will be significant. But again, why not see if that's a method that works? And then grants QSMO, taking lessons from both of the HR and financial management QSMOs. They've just announced recently the creation of their commercial marketplace on the SIN as well, following CFR2 requirements and their FIBF requirements. So lots of opportunities for vendors who have grant solutions to become part of that approved marketplace, which I think is extremely important, not only for federal government, but also for making options available for state and local governments, the recipients of grants, really bringing everybody into a common ecosystem, really moving people away from a lot of those manual processes that they have, and hopefully offering some affordable options to some of those smaller governments that really do need it. And then, of course, a new QSMO has been born, the acquisition one at GSA, and I'm really excited to see what they have learned from the other QSMOs and what they're doing. So, like, after being in this conversation for so many years, one thing that everybody has said over and over again is like, you know, we need to learn, we need to listen, we need to learn from what's worked and what hasn't worked. And a lot has worked. You started with the story about payroll providers and how they've been doing this and never missed a payroll. Like, you know, love it or not, right? Everybody's getting paid, and that demonstrates that it does work and it can work. And so I'm really proud of the fact that we're continuing to move those forward. The QSMOs are really leaning in a leadership role for their lines of business, and testing new ways of doing things. I think we're going to learn a lot from the progress that they're making.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, you know, you mentioned the folks feeling like they don't have another option. You have the marketplace out there. And I think somewhere in the middle is really where it needs to be. There's certainly folks that look at this from the standpoint of, if there was more policy driving this, that was a bit of more of a forcing function, that could be helpful. But to your point, also making sure, so maybe the policy is around driving towards the shared services, but then what options are out there, looking at the marketplace, taking full advantage of what the QSMOs have been able to do to make sure that the agency and organization has the right set of services and they're doing it in the most effective way. Of course, money plays into that as well. And, you know, making strategic decisions about, and often innovative decisions about how to fund this is another key issue. But it just, and one last thing that while you're talking, that the state and local component, is we're looking at some of the shifting of responsibilities and roles at the state and local level. We are the National Academy of Public Administration, but as I said, we work with all levels of government, and seeing what the implications of these services, these policy decisions are, and what it actually looks like on the ground is really illuminating, and some of the most rewarding efforts that we've been involved with is really seeing what that looks like more directly.
Yeah, it is quite the ecosystem when you look at how massive it is and how big it is. And so if we all give ourselves a little bit of grace and understanding that it is the largest possible ecosystem you could imagine in the world, the fact that we're continuing to make progress is really important to acknowledge.
Beth, if you were to go back into government now, what would be kind of on the top of your mind in terms of prioritizing next steps and continuing to build out?
You know, it's interesting, because if I were to go back into government, I feel like I'm so much smarter than I was. I feel like I've now gotten both sides of the story, so I'd be able to call BS on a lot of things now. But I do think that, like, I do think that my comments around technology and how fast it should be going, and your comments and your around like how do we get people more comfortable with how fast technology is moving in government. I would feel very personally drawn to that, because I think that we can get in our own way sometimes because we're nervous about that. And for rightly so. We've been burned so many times in government, right? Things that just never we've years and years of building things, they never got to production, money wasted, GAO reports, like all about how all of these things have gone sideways. And so I don't overlook that, but I do think that the train has left the station. It's moving, and I think we really do need to figure out a way to bring it to get on the train, and use it to advance the important work that everyone does. And I look back and I think like this journey of shared services has essentially like been in three phases, right? The first was proving it could work, which we talked about. Over and over again, payroll, HR, finance, travel, like there's stories across the board of how this has worked, how it's worked. And then the second part of the phase was really building the governance and standards and marketplaces. It's like, okay, well now we acknowledge what worked and didn't work. So how do we create a future that we think we can scale to? And I think that now the phase that we're in is moving toward like better adoption. And what I mentioned around making technology be an enabler to get there and moving faster. And so I think that would be pretty exciting to work on. What do you think the federal shared service ecosystem should look like? Or what would, if you could wave your magic wand, what would you say needs to be done in the next few years?
Well, I definitely hire your son as soon as he's available. And some other smart kids that I know, for sure. But, like when we've been looking at approaching these studies from slightly different angles, some of the things that kind of have come to been the aha moments is that this is we've seen repeatedly that the operational efficiency alone is no longer enough. That as folks get more sophisticated with how they're measuring success and thinking about and articulating their expectations and being more involved in the governance process, it's things like customer satisfaction, it's transparency. That was definitely a through line. And what we heard in each of these studies is we put requests out there, we are looking for information and we don't necessarily know where it goes. And it is not to be overly critical of these agencies. They're trying to do so much, often with constrained resources, and in some cases, even physical challenge in the infrastructure is there as well. But, the transparency, the responsiveness, and really, the ease of use are becoming the primary measures of success. So I think that's going to continue, and the progress we've made there's really, I don't know a situation where that ever goes backwards. I would expect shared services to evolve from what we talked about a little bit, like from that discrete service offerings to more in terms of integrated enterprise platforms that are using data and automation and AI and some of these things that, again, are a little bit intimidating, but really when used right by and appropriately really empower a more enterprise set of solutions as opposed to one specific service. So I think that the agencies that are preparing successfully for what comes next really will be, focused on the governance and, again, evolving that so it works. The workforce readiness, there's all sorts of literacy issues as we think about technology, and what that means and where appropriately to automate and then enable folks to then provide an even higher level of customer service and experience. And as always, the technology modernization is going to be there. I'm going to leave that to you and your friends in the private sector space to really inform and think about and inspire a really talented group of IT professionals within the federal government. Looking at the clock, and also we did have a few questions. I didn't know if there was anything else that you had, Beth, or do you want to kind of flip to?
If we have any questions. And if we don't know the answer, we might call on the audience to help us.
Exactly.
We sit outside of the government. So
there's two in the chat. That first one, Ryan, I would be happy to share a little bit more about how NAPA works. We are on the GSA schedule and have a number of different ways to engage. If it's okay with you, Ryan, I would say that yes, the agency does pay for the assessment, and I'd be happy to share a little bit more about specifics with you or anyone else who has questions about this. But there's a number of different ways that we can engage if there would be an interest. I got a thumbs up from Ryan. Okay.
Yeah.
And then Lance posed a question: as agencies look to operationalize AI, would the government benefit from AI centers of excellence that develop best practices, or from AI-enabled QSMO service offerings that drive adoption at scale? Where can industry contribute most effectively? I'll ask Beth if you have a thought on the industry piece of it, because I'm always going to support centers of excellence if they're well developed and well executed.
Yeah, I think for me, like AI is like, we used to build houses with a hammer this big, and now we've just have a hammer this big. Like, it's just a tool, right? In a lot of ways, right, that you're using to deliver something. So I think that there is a need for AI governance and AI, like some of those things, you know, to exist in government, to make sure that we're using the tools properly and that we're securing our data and all of that important stuff, right? But I don't know that it's different from how we would do it without AI. But when it comes to like delivering these solutions that these QSMOs are managing, like that needs to be part of how they're managing it. It's not like making it separate makes it sound like it's not all integrated. And in this world, I can tell you it is all integrated. And so we need to make sure that the folks managing the marketplaces are informed about how AI should be part of that marketplace, part of those solutions. And there's a difference between you build something using AI tools and you build something that actually has AI functionality in it. And
Right.
Those are very different things, right? And so how you're managing that and how you're assessing compliance for the fact that you're actually bringing AI into a solution versus I'm just using an AI, a bigger hammer to build it for you faster and better. Two different ways to think about using AI. And so I do think separating it from for purposes of the QSMO marketplace would probably set us backwards.
That makes a lot of sense. And as we continue again to have a lot of conversations with agencies in terms of AI governance, it almost feels like as soon as you start the conversation, there's been a little bit more of an evolution of how to use it. So it's an ongoing, it certainly seems like it would need to be an iterative and ongoing live discussion that responds to a rapidly changing marketplace. Are there other questions from folks? Comments, disagreements with what we shared?
Yeah.
Not sure why I'm opening ourselves up to that, but give it a whirl.
I think that means everyone agrees with us, Brenna. Probably not.
I won't speak for you, Beth, but for me, that would be first. But I do think that this audience, this group of participants, I think acknowledges that there's so much effort, as you were saying, Beth, to do this, to refine this, to be responsive. And I do think that the conversation around customer experience has evolved quite a bit, both within shared services and more broadly within the federal government, and thinking about it in new and different ways. Some of the things that we talked about in the study, in the studies, was different ways to get that, journey mapping and really discussing the whole life cycle of any activities has been, I think, a bit of an evolution from where the federal government was several years ago. And I do think that shared services and focusing on that as employees, as internal customers, has changed the conversation and evolved the conversation and helped agencies in general.
I agree. I agree. I think, but I think even as we think about our processes and our journey mapping and all of those things that like document what we think we need, I think it's all changing fast. I think even the way
Yeah.
that we look at how we do things and like all the people that have to touch the things along the way to produce the outcome, like I think we have to take a step back from even that and say, how are we doing those things more efficiently? And have we brought in new tools to help us do those processes? And are we thinking about how like the outcome is really, are we open to new ways to get to the outcome? And that will, I think, forever be the hard part of the change management of this initiative, which is like, are we willing to let the outcome happen, but the process is different?
And that's such a good point. And when we worked with FPAC, that wasn't in the initial scope of work, but as we were working with a group that was very reorganization, realignment fatigued. Over the course of about 5 years, there had been several attempts to find the right optimal set of structures and roles and responsibilities. Out of that came the discussion about a more refined deliverable that was a change management playbook that was really looking at, okay, what are we hearing from leaders? How are they driving the conversation? Is everyone clear on the vision and the case for making what sometimes feels uncomfortable change? But where there was common agreement was, if this is going to help us deliver services better to our customers, then this is what we should be doing. Sounds super common sense and kind of obvious, but sometimes it is that step back and kind of stepping out of some of the technical aspects and saying, okay, here's where we need to start. It was a bit eye-opening. That and and combination of starting the first one of these in 2021 and finishing the last in 2024, to your point, Beth, that some of the changes and innovation and updates to things was pretty eye-opening in only 3 years.
Yeah, I think anybody on this call who's a team lead or a process owner or a manager or anyone, I think challenging yourselves to challenge your people to like every month bring me some better way to do something. Like, and I'm like this, like even holding your own team to some sort of a continuous improvement. Like, what's one thing we can stop doing? What's one thing that we can,
Right.
one step of this process we can eliminate? I think starts to set a different kind of mentality in your teams too, about their openness to change and ultimately probably their openness to new technologies and new models for doing work.
Yeah, that change piece.
So hard. Well, I think, Dan, I don't know, you're still on. I think if there are no more questions, we probably give everybody back a few minutes to go have lunch.
Fantastic. First, thank you both for the presentation today and the discussion. Thanks to our attendees. I can't get my screen to move the way I want. Here we go. Our attendees for coming and listening and providing your feedback in the comments and your questions. Nancy did just post a feedback form, so if you like what you heard, please respond. If you didn't, maybe just email me. No, I'm kidding. You can still use the link. But thank you to our guest speakers and to our folks here. We'll see you again in August. Our next meeting will be on August 11th. We'll be another speaker set for you. So with that, thank you all, and adieu. Bye, y'all.